Hi, I'm Milas. My brother-in-law used to call me a fake tech expert in front of our whole family. Said I just made PowerPoints and smiled in meetings. They all laughed. My mom, my sister, they laughed. But last Christmas, while he was bragging at the dinner table about a deal he claimed to lead, his boss told everyone the truth. I was the one who bought his company for $57 million. What happens when your own family would rather believe a liar than see you for who you really are? What if the spotlight was never theirs to begin with, but they stole it anyway? And now, I've got the receipts. It started like every other fall dinner at my mother's house. Friday night in Austin. The kind of evening where the air starts to get that brittle, dry edge, and the kitchen smells like rosemary, lemon chicken, and the one bottle of wine Craig insists on bringing, because Texas Reds pair surprisingly well with poultry. My sister Leora always laughs at that, like she's never heard it before. Grandma Orla sits in her usual chair by the window, crocheting quietly, but always listening. She listens better than the rest of them combined. I brought my usual salad, out of habit more than duty, and sat at my designated end of the table. Not that anyone assigned it, but it was always clear. Craig at the head, Mom beside him, Leora on the other, and me tucked in near the serving cart. Dinner began with small talk. Leora's new Pilates instructor, Mom's book club drama. Then Craig cleared his throat, the universal signal in our family that he was ready to talk about himself. So, Byteframe just got mentioned on Tech Minds this week, he said, grinning. Top 10 AI disruptors in Texas. They said we're shaking up the market. Big things ahead. The table responded just like he knew it would. A chorus of, wow, that's amazing, and Mom reaching over to squeeze his wrist with that, you've always been special look. I smiled politely and took a sip of water. Actually, I said, we're reviewing a few AI platform expansions right now. One of them is pushing into visual data recognition for logistics. Could be interesting. Craig tilted his head like he was trying not to laugh. You're in tech? What, managing Instagram hashtags now? I froze. Just for a second. Enough to hear the quiet chuckle from Leora. Enough to feel Mom's eyes shift away and the sudden absence of silverware noise. Then I smiled. Wide, polite, unbothered. Something like that, I said. Craig poured himself more wine, as if he'd said nothing at all. You should see the way we've restructured our back end. True optimization. It's like playing chess with data. I don't know why it still stung. Maybe because no one corrected him. Maybe because I knew what I'd done in the last 6 months. 6 acquisitions, 3 in stealth. 2 led directly under my recommendation. One of them had pivoted a billion-dollar firm. But to them, I was still the one with the color-coded folders. After dinner, Craig leaned over. You should come tomorrow, he said. There's a startup showcase downtown. Might be fun for you to see what real tech looks like. I raised an eyebrow. Sure, what time? Don't worry, I'll put you on the list, he smirked. The next morning, I arrived at the Austin Tech Hub 20 minutes early. The check-in line was long, but moved fast. I gave my name. The young woman at the desk looked at her screen, then handed me a badge. Kay Dorn, event staff. Excuse me? I asked. That's how it was listed, she said. You're with Mr. Lemrick's guest list. I stared at the badge. Kay Dorn, event staff. A category normally reserved for people setting up tables and checking microphones. I looked across the lobby and saw Craig waving from a small cluster of founders, his badge already clipped perfectly straight. Craig Lemrick, CEO, Byteframe AI. He winked. I didn't say anything. I clipped the badge on and walked in. I stood in the back as he took the stage. His voice rang with authority, quoting data I knew he didn't source, referencing strategies eerily similar to a presentation I gave in a closed-door meeting 2 months ago. And the audience nodded, laughed, applauded. I stayed until the end, didn't interrupt, didn't confront. This wasn't the first time I was told I didn't belong, I thought, but it might be the last time I let it slide. Afterward, he passed by me in the hallway, barely glancing. "Hope you enjoyed the show," he said. I smiled. It was enlightening. That night, I drove home in silence. The city lights blurred past, and something settled in my chest. Not sadness, not quite anger, something else. Never argue with a fool. Onlookers may not be able to tell the difference. That quote from Twain echoed in my mind as I turned into my street. He had no idea who he was talking to. He may not know what I do, but soon he'll know what I'm capable of. The next day, I showed up at the tech showcase Craig mentioned, not because I was curious about the startups, but because I wanted to see how far he was willing to stretch his version of the truth. The Austin Convention Center was already humming with the energy of early pitches and half-drunk lattes by the time I arrived. I wore a simple navy blouse, slacks, and low heels. Understated, but sharp. Not flashy, not invisible either. Or so I thought. Inside the main lobby, digital displays rotated photos and clips from key players in regional tech, those deemed worthy of applause. I stood near the back, sipping weak coffee from a branded paper cup, letting the buzz wrap around me like static. Founders in matching hoodies gestured at pitch decks. Old investors posed for selfies with new ones. Then, the slideshow behind the registration desk paused on a photo I recognized instantly. It was from a product launch last year, a prototype demonstration I'd led, while Byteframe was still pretending to be about ideas, not image. There I was, Craig beside me, a small group of engineers grinning behind a table full of monitors. But something was missing. My name. It wasn't under the caption. It read, "Launch led by Craig Lemrick and team." The badge clipped to my blazer had been carefully cropped out in the frame. Only Craig's name appeared, top center, glowing like the hero of a play he didn't write. I didn't flinch. I just watched as it looped again in the background, fading into the next frame. It wasn't just omission, it was design. To them, I was part of the backdrop. Replaceable. Optional. I didn't confront him. Didn't interrupt his little networking circle where he was mid-sentence about leading vision in emerging markets. I simply turned and left the lobby, made my way through the booths, and sat silently in the back row during his demo. He pointed at graphs. He exaggerated growth rates. He claimed timelines I knew for a fact he hadn't met. Later that evening, back home, I poured myself a glass of water, kicked off my shoes, and pulled up Byteframe's website. I'd intended only to see if the photo was isolated. What I found was worse. In the About Us section, beneath the glowing founder bio, Craig had clearly written himself. I saw my name, in a line that might as well have been graffiti on a wall. Melis Dorn, PR assistant during our early phase. PR. Assistant. I stared at the screen. That phrase alone felt like a slap wearing silk gloves. I was the one who negotiated their first capital bridge round. I wrote the analysis that brought in their initial advisory board. But sure, PR assistant. That wasn't a typo, that was a tactic. I didn't text him, didn't call. I bookmarked the page. Then I opened a folder I hadn't touched in months. Misattribution Archive. I had started it back when another colleague at a prior firm presented one of my models without credit. At the time, I'd thought keeping proof was overreacting. Now, it felt like premonition. The next morning at work, while skimming a portfolio brief, my assistant leaned over and grinned. "Hey, saw your name on a startup site last night," she said. "Didn't know you had a PR side hustle." I didn't correct her. I smiled faintly. "Must be another Melis." She laughed and went back to her desk. I clicked the folder again, created a new subdirectory, dragged a few screenshots over. "If you don't write your own story," I muttered, "someone else will, and they'll erase you while doing it." That night, I sat at the edge of my bed, notebook in hand, pen gliding slowly. I didn't feel angry, not exactly, but something deeper, a slow, pulsing pressure under the ribs, the kind that tells you this isn't going away. This isn't casual disrespect. This is calculated. Craig wasn't just pretending I didn't matter. He was crafting an entire version of history where I never existed. He thinks no one's watching. But I've started recording. I was halfway through reviewing a deal summary when my phone buzzed. At first, it was just a ping, then another. Then a burst of messages stacked on top of each other like a domino chain. I glanced at the screen. The family group chat, the one my mom insisted we keep active, so we always stay connected. I hadn't said much in it lately, but I still checked it often, like a habit too old to break. Craig had just been featured on a startup podcast. He'd apparently dropped phrases like vision-led execution and deep market wisdom. The messages in the chat were lighting up about it. Mom posted a link with the caption, "So proud of our Craig." Leora responded with a gif of applause. Someone, maybe Uncle Kent, chimed in, "Leora sure married a genius." I stared at it. No one mentioned the inaccuracies in the podcast. No one questioned why Craig was talking about a product Malis Dorn had designed. When I offered a polite correction, just a sentence, it wasn't even combative. Actually, that AI model was developed under a non-compete clause with GenX, not ByteFrame. 10 seconds later, my message was gone. Deleted. Not by me. Then came the real blow. "You were removed from this chat by admin." My heart didn't drop. It stilled. It sat in place like a stone underwater. Admin was my mother. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just stared at the screen like I would an unexpected boardroom dismissal, not because I hadn't seen it coming, but because it confirmed what I already knew. It wasn't just a chat. It was my seat at the table, and someone decided I didn't belong anymore. That weekend, Leora hosted a small dinner. Just the core family, she said. Heath and I arrived with a bottle of wine, more out of formality than excitement. The evening was exactly what I expected. Casserole, cornbread, and a constant stream of Craig's voice filling the room like background music no one dared turn off. At one point, I tried to share about a recent integration I'd led, a logistics firm pivoting into AI supply chain modeling. I barely finished the second sentence before Craig cut in. "Let's not bore Mom with corporate jargon," he said with a smirk. Mom didn't argue. She just nodded, grateful to be spared another acronym. No one asked about the deal. No one asked me anything. Grandma Orla looked at me across the table. Her eyes didn't blink, just stayed locked in that long, unreadable stare she'd mastered. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. I wasn't cut out. I was faded out. Slowly, deliberately. On the ride home, Heath kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly near mine. He said nothing until we were halfway across the bridge. "You okay?" he asked. I looked out at the water. Lights from the city shimmered over it like truths buried under performance. "When they pretend you're not there long enough," I said, "you start wondering if you ever were." Neither of us spoke for a while. Later that night, after brushing my teeth, after changing into my favorite worn sweatshirt, I opened my laptop and added 2 screenshots to the archive, the podcast quote, and the removal notification from the group chat. I labeled the folder not evidence or revenge, but simply memory. Not for court, not for confrontation, just so I didn't start thinking I imagined it. The next day, I began organizing the folder like a case file, time-stamped, categorized, cross-referenced, not for anyone else's eyes, just mine. I needed something to ground me, because when your history is rewritten enough times, your own memory begins to feel like a fragile thing. That night, before shutting down, I scrolled back through the last message I'd gotten from my mother, sent just before she removed me. "Let's keep things positive in here," I whispered aloud to no one but myself. I've been too quiet for too long. Monday mornings were usually mechanical for me. Coffee in one hand, inbox already at 23, unread before 8 a.m. At North Tech Capital, the week always started with a stack of briefs, filtered and flagged by my team for potential strategic acquisition. I didn't need caffeine to do this job, but I used it like punctuation. Sip, skim, flag. Repeat. That morning in early November, the fourth file in my queue was marked as Tier 2 priority. No red flags, no unusual alerts. Just a company name, ByteFrame AI Solutions. My eyes lingered a second too long. I opened the folder. It hit me like a silent punch. CEO, Craig Lemrick. I sat back slowly, as if leaning any further forward would make this surreal moment collapse. I clicked through the slides. Early demo footage I recognized instantly. Financials laid out with more confidence than they deserved. The burn rate was unsustainable. Debt was bleeding out like an open vein hidden beneath a suit jacket. And I was the one now holding the power to determine if it lived or died. Of all the companies in the pipeline, his landed in mine. I didn't say a word. Not to my assistant, not to legal, not to the investment committee. I read every single page of the ByteFrame file as though it belonged to a stranger. I acted like a strategist, not a sister-in-law. No one at NorthTech knew the connection. Yet. That afternoon, as I was preparing my initial notes, a new email landed in my inbox. It was from Craig's assistant, but clearly not meant for me. Her intended recipient must have had a name that auto-completed similarly. Maybe a Charles, maybe someone in compliance. But it hit mine. Subject, urgent, extend burn rate timeline attached were 3 slides, all labeled internal eyes only. Personnel cuts. Projections of solvency only if fresh capital was injected within 60 days. One line in particular made my hands still. Maintain founder image for external optics. We pitch confidence, not risk. I closed the file, opened it again, read it twice. Craig wasn't just hiding the cracks. He was spray painting over them and calling it innovation. This wasn't scaling. This was gambling. And he was betting with money he didn't have, and trust he hadn't earned. I printed the original ByteFrame dossier and placed it carefully into a locked drawer. Then I composed a quick email to our internal compliance team, requesting advisory-only role for ByteFrame analysis due to relational proximity. Will recuse from core negotiation, but remain technical advisor. Simple, professional, impeccably clean. You can be ethical and still ruthless, my mentor once told me. That's called integrity with teeth. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. Heath asked me that evening over dinner, as he poured 2 glasses of wine and handed me one without a word. What's the play? I didn't look up from my laptop. Observe, recommend, recuse, but never pretend I didn't see the fire coming. He raised his glass slightly. To vision, then. I clinked mine. To strategy, because Craig still thought this was a game of optics, like if you smiled wide enough and used enough buzzwords, the numbers wouldn't matter. But at this level, we don't fund charisma. We fund viability. ByteFrame was running out of both. Before logging off, I created a folder labeled ByteFrame Risk Matrix. I saved both the email and the misdirected internal slides there. Password protected, time-stamped. When the office lights dimmed and most of the floor had gone quiet, I stayed by the window, watching the city hold its breath. From up here on the 19th floor, everything looked calm. Still. He had no idea, but I was holding the matchbook now. The following week, I sat in the observation room on the 12th floor, looking through the glass into the main boardroom where the investment panel was gathering. They were there to review ByteFrame's pitch, Craig's pitch, technically. I wasn't supposed to say anything. That had been made clear. My role was technical advisor, a quiet observer with no vote, no voice. Craig's face appeared on the large screen at the front of the room. He was dialing in from San Francisco, framed in front of that same skyline he used for every podcast, every panel, every self-appointed moment of genius. He smiled easily, performed even better. The man had charm, I'll give him that. And apparently, no shame. The first slide of his presentation flashed onto the screen. I recognized it instantly. Fonts, color palette, phrasing. I'd written that framework, not recently, months ago, for a completely different client. And there it was, lifted whole, with only the logo swapped. My notes, my terminology, my structure, dressed in Byte frame blue. He didn't just steal my work. He dressed it up and paraded it like it had never belonged to anyone else. I leaned back in my chair, one leg crossed over the other. No one in the room noticed my change in posture. I didn't let my face show anything. I just watched. Let him go on, slide after slide of my architecture. My voice, made foreign. Then came his closing remarks. "We conceptualized this strategy internally from scratch," he said, smiling. "It reflects our team's ability to think ahead of the curve." I didn't laugh, but my phone lit up beside me. A text from Heath. "He just lied on record. You good?" I typed back slowly. "I'm documenting. That's my move now." After the panel filed out, my supervisor Monica approached me. She'd been in the room, but hadn't said much. She looked at me the way a chess player looks at a board-won move before checkmate. "What did you think?" she asked, not unkindly. I shrugged. "He's polished, but thin and familiar." Monica tilted her head slightly. "Let me guess. He's family?" I smiled without showing my teeth. "He's not my enemy," I said, "but he made me his stepping stone. I've simply decided to step aside, so he falls." Back at my desk, I opened my misattribution archive again and added screenshots. His slides, my originals, timestamps, the email. Oh, right. The email. I dug back into my inbox and found it. 2 months earlier, Craig had messaged me asking for some input on a new deck he was building. "Just looking for a framework to organize our vision," he'd written. "Would love your strategic lens on this." Naively, though I'd never admit that out loud, I'd sent him a clean outline. It had taken me all of 20 minutes to sketch, but it was the product of years of instinct and training. I'd assumed he'd use it for internal brainstorming, maybe adapt it. I never thought he'd claim it. But there it was, word for word, now publicly presented as his original work. I didn't react. I archived it. Then I submitted a quiet request to our legal team to begin monitoring any intellectual property overlaps between ByteFrame's materials and prior Northtech internal work. Not because I wanted to sue him, but because I wanted a record. I didn't need revenge. I needed receipts. That night, I opened my journal and wrote, "Don't fight to be heard by those committed to misunderstanding you. Just keep receipts." It was late when I finally closed my laptop. Most of the building had emptied out hours ago, but I lingered, just as I always did. Not because I had to, because I liked knowing that when the world went quiet, my work kept whispering truth. Just before leaving, I refreshed my inbox one more time. A new subject line stared back at me. ByteFrame, board interest flagged. I let out a quiet breath through my nose. No smile, just a shift in air pressure. Funny, they're interested now that I've stayed silent. Sunday brunch at my mother's house had always been more about performance than connection. There was a dress code, an unspoken seating chart, and a rhythm to how things unfolded. Compliments served before coffee, personal updates only if they could be neatly summarized. I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose, just enough to avoid the awkward wait for Craig to finish his latest monologue. The dining table was already buzzing with laughter when I stepped in. Leora waved, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. Craig was mid-story, something about a pitch that got a round of applause before he even clicked the first slide. I placed my casserole on the sideboard, forced a smile, and took my seat. We were halfway through scrambled eggs and sourdough when Leora turned to me, eyebrows raised, half curious. "Isn't your company the one working with Microsoft now, Melis?" Before I could answer, Craig leaned back with a smirk. "No, that's my ByteFrame team. Melis is doing something else." The room chuckled lightly. My mother poured herself more juice. No one corrected him. Grandma Orla didn't laugh. She just sipped her tea and looked at me over the rim of her cup, expression unreadable. I smiled through it, again. When even the truth is inconvenient, they don't deny it. They replace it. I cleared my plate before anyone else, pretended to check a work message, and excused myself early. Hugs were optional and lightly given. By the time I got to the car, the sky had dimmed behind a cloud cover, casting a gray light across the windshield. Heath started the engine, glancing over. "Want to stop for coffee?" I shook my head. I need silence more than caffeine. Just as we pulled away, my phone vibrated. A message from Mom. I tapped it open, expecting some half-hearted thank you for showing up. What I read instead made my throat go tight. "She always finds a way to insert herself. That's why she never got far." The message was clearly meant for someone else, likely Leora. Or worse, Craig. My fingers hovered for a moment before typing, "You sent this to me." 3 dots appeared, paused, disappeared. Hours passed, with nothing. Later that night, as I sat on the edge of the bed in my pajamas, Heath brushing his teeth down the hall, the reply came, "Sorry, wrong thread. Hope you're okay." "Hope you're okay." I didn't reply. I reread it twice, then once more. I didn't cry. I didn't hurl the phone or throw words into the night. I filed the screenshot into the misattribution archive. I labeled it Internal Mastersiain, maternal. That evening, I didn't speak much. Heath sat beside me, his palm warm over my knee. "When people show you who they are," I said quietly, "believe them the first time." He nodded, didn't press. That's what I loved about him. He knew when silence wasn't absence, it was restraint. Monday came, and with it, a clarity I didn't expect. In the elevator up to my floor at North Tech, I rehearsed nothing. I didn't need to. I'd already decided. By mid-morning, I stepped into Monica's office, caught her between 2 calls. "I'd like to step back from the Byte Frame pitch review," I said. She studied me for a moment. "Any reason beyond the conflict of interest? If they want Craig's voice, let them have it unfiltered," I replied. "I'll handle the technical audit quietly." She nodded. "You sure?" "I've never been more." Back at my desk, I opened the Byte Frame risk report draft. My fingers moved without pause. Cash flow unstable, product pipeline unclear, founder credibility untested. I added my final line, the same one I would have said aloud if I'd still been at that table. Founder risk, high, stability unsupported, strategy misaligned. I clicked submit, then I whispered under my breath. "You never asked what I really do." I didn't want to attend the panel. My name wasn't listed anywhere near the promotional materials, and frankly, I preferred it that way. Still, North Tech asked me to go, not to speak, just to observe. Craig, on the other hand, was the headliner. The title? Startup Grit, Surviving the AI Market. I couldn't make this stuff up if I tried. The conference was hosted in downtown Austin, inside one of those slick co-working spaces that tried too hard to look effortless. Neon signs with inspirational quotes on the walls, baristas pulling oat milk lattes for under-caffeinated execs, and startup interns buzzing like bees who'd never known failure. I walked in quietly, flashed my badge, and headed toward the back. As I approached the check-in table, a young woman wearing a headset and oversized optimism looked up. "You're with Mr. Lemrick, right? His assistant?" I blinked. Let the moment sit. "No," I replied with a polite tone sharpened by years of restraint. "I run the investment team currently reviewing his valuation." Her eyes widened. Oh, sorry. I just thought..." I smiled again, even smaller this time. "You're not the first." Craig was 10 feet away, already surrounded by fans of his own mythology. He didn't flinch when he saw me, just gave that infuriating smirk and returned to talking about ByteFrame like he'd invented the concept of innovation. You only play invisible for so long before someone mistakes it as permission. The panel began with the usual moderator fluff, questions about pivots and growth, the tired hero's journey of the founder, who bootstrapped and disrupted. Craig leaned in like he'd written the playbook. He talked about strategic scaling, market reactivity, and product market fit. He named projects that I initiated, referenced partners I had brokered relationships with, Quoted phrases I'd coined in internal white papers. No attribution. The room nodded, laughed, applauded on cue. But not everyone clapped. Sitting beside me, calm as a man watching chess, was Simon Karst, my old mentor, now a senior partner at one of the largest venture funds in the country. After Craig finished, Simon leaned toward me, eyes still fixed on the stage. He always was good at dressing borrowed coats as original. I didn't respond. You taught him that look? I finally asked. Simon turned to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I taught you to be silent until silence was no longer safe. After the panel wrapped, people scattered toward the catered snacks and networking nooks. I turned to leave, but Simon tapped my shoulder and nodded toward a corner booth at the attached cafe. Over coffee, he cut to the chase. You and I both know Craig didn't build ByteFrame's core strategy. You shaped it, quietly, precisely, and now he's leveraging your work like it's part of his DNA. I know, I said simply. He stirred his espresso. Do you want to kill the deal? No, I replied, meeting his gaze. I want the truth on the table before they buy the fiction. He considered that for a beat, then nodded. I'll handle the internal reshuffle. You won't need to speak. Just be in the room. That'll be enough. That was Simon's style. Subtle pressure, strategic exposure. Let the lie trip over its own shoelaces. Back at my desk that evening, I received the updated meeting list. My name had been added, not just as a technical advisor, but as an observer in the due diligence roundtable. A few clicks later, I saw that Craig's access had been slightly limited. Not blocked, just controlled. I didn't need revenge. I needed accuracy. Revenge isn't always loud, I wrote in my notebook later. Sometimes it's the calm correction of a false record. By the time I wrapped up for the night, I felt something I hadn't in weeks, anticipation. Not giddy, not vengeful, just steady, like waiting at the top of a hill you built yourself. Craig stood by the bar after the panel, laughing too loudly with two founders I barely recognized. Simon walked past him slowly and murmured just loud enough for me to hear. He's still performing, but next time, the spotlight won't protect him. I nodded, eyes on Craig. Let him talk, I whispered. I'm almost done listening. Christmas Eve at my mother's house looked the same as it always had. Polished wood floors, too many candles burning in every room, and the smell of baked ham mixed with sugar cookies. From the outside, it might have seemed like tradition. But this year, the air was tighter, more staged. Everyone was there. Leora had curled her hair the way Mom liked. Craig had on that smug holiday sweater he wore every year, like it was an inside joke with the universe. Heath and I arrived just after dusk, bottle of wine in hand, faces set to neutral. I wasn't there to perform, but I also wasn't going to be anyone's background character again. Dinner started like usual. Craig dominated the table, as if the centerpiece was his soapbox. We just finalized our AI optimization partnership, he said between bites. ByteFrame is scaling like wildfire. Honestly, the timing was perfect. Northtech didn't even see it coming. I made them come to the table. I sat quietly, swirling my wine. The clinks of silverware felt distant, almost like a soundtrack to someone else's meal. I caught Heath's eye once. He didn't say anything, but the slight tilt of his head said everything. Craig kept going, layering on buzzwords like tinsel, basking in the nods and small gasps of admiration. Then came the moment. Grandma Orla gently set her fork down, folded her napkin beside her plate, and said in the kind of voice that sliced softly, "That's odd, because when I asked Malis a few weeks ago about ByteFrame, she didn't mention you leading the deal. She said she flagged it for acquisition." The entire room went silent. A glass clinked faintly, somewhere near Leora's elbow. Craig's jaw stiffened. I looked at my grandmother, then at Craig. Calmly. "I recused from negotiation," I said. "But yes, I submitted the initial acquisition trigger for ByteFrame." Craig's face lost its color. My mother blinked rapidly, lips parting but no words forming. Leora dropped her fork. Craig tried to recover. You flagged it. That's not how it was presented internally. Before the silence could stretch, my phone buzzed beside my plate. I glanced at it. A notification from TechWatch. Breaking. North Tech senior partner confirms ByteFrame acquisition was strategically led by Melis Dorn. I opened it, skimmed the lead. In a rare public statement, Simon Karst acknowledged that Melis Dorn initiated and guided the strategic acquisition of ByteFrame AI, calling her insight quietly brilliant. Craig's voice cracked. You told them? I set my phone down slowly. No, he did. Dad tried to speak, something about keeping things civil. Mom didn't meet my gaze. Leora was frozen. I turned to Craig. You lied to people who already wanted to believe you. That's not strategy. That's vanity. Grandma Orla nodded slowly. It's time this family stops clapping for smoke and starts seeing fire. No one argued with her. I stood up and reached for my coat. The room had gone still, not quiet, just empty of illusion. This was never about proving I'm better, I said evenly, just about proving I was here. Craig's voice broke the silence as I stepped toward the hallway. You made me look like a fraud. I paused, glanced over my shoulder. You just weren't used to someone keeping the receipts. The morning after Christmas Eve dinner, the air felt heavier than the sky. A gray fog pressed against the windows as I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. Heath was already in the kitchen, setting a mug of coffee on the nightstand with the kind of wordless tenderness that said, "You don't owe anyone anything today." I hadn't even opened my phone yet. I already knew it would be there. Something. Maybe text, maybe silence. But the truth always leaves a trail. My notifications were flooded. Not just from family. From reporters, industry contacts, LinkedIn messages, and one line that kept repeating in every screenshot sent to me. You hear that podcast? They played his confession. Tech Insider had dropped a new episode overnight. The title? False Founders, The Stories Behind the Deals. And there it was. Craig's voice. Not edited, not misquoted. Just raw audio. I just needed to look like I ran the show. Our pitch deck? Someone else made it. Strategy? I took what worked. He laughed after saying it, like it was nothing. A badge of honor, not a confession. What Craig didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Grandma Orla had sent the clip. Weeks ago. She'd found the audio, tucked away in an old flash drive Craig had used to test a home podcast setup. She heard him brag. She knew what it meant. So she sent it. Not to me. To the producers. And now the world was listening. I watched as the hashtags trended. 57 Melter Faker climbed the charts. Comments poured in, not just attacking Craig, but questioning how many other women had been erased from the narrative to keep men like him at the center of the stage. North Tech didn't issue a long-winded statement. Just one line. All acquisitions are based on verifiable strategic performance. And that was enough. Later that day, I opened the original acquisition file from my private archive. I wanted to see it again, not because I doubted it, but because truth has a weight that needs to be held sometimes. My name was there. Clear, unmistakable. Strategic originator, Melis Dorn. My signature, my risk report. The document Craig never saw, never even realized was the tipping point. He never thought I was in the room, let alone holding the pen. A few hours later, Simon Karst called. He's requesting image protection, Simon said calmly. Wants us to delay public confirmation of your role. And what did you say? I asked, already knowing. That maybe it's time the quiet ones got their name on the door. I didn't respond immediately. Heath passed me a second cup of coffee, smirking like he'd heard Simon through the speaker. By that evening, the family group chat had come back to life in the most ironic way. Vera texted first. Melis, we didn't know the full picture. Your grandma acted on her own. We hope you're not angry. Leora followed with a meme that read, Queen Energy, and added, just wish I had seen it sooner. I didn't reply. I just dropped a link to the public due diligence log and muted the thread. Late that night, a knock at the door startled me. Heath answered. It was a courier with a small, carefully wrapped box from North Tech. Inside was a plaque. Lead strategist, Byte Frame Acquisition. My name engraved in brushed steel. Real, solid, not whispered, not guessed, not assumed. I ran my fingers across the letters slowly, not because I doubted their permanence, but because after so long being left out of the story, I wanted to feel every edge of it for myself. I lifted the plaque and whispered, "Now let the record show, I was never fake tech." The first executive meeting of the new year carried the weight of unspoken tension. Denver was coated in a quiet frost, the city still stretching out of its holiday days. Inside North Tech's headquarters, the boardroom hummed with muted anticipation, not for what would be said, but for what wouldn't need to be. I sat at the long table, not at the head, not even at the front third, but where decisions still echo with power. Craig entered 5 minutes late. No one flinched. No one filled the silence with greetings. He took the chair opposite me, adjusting his cufflinks as if his authority hadn't already started to slip through his fingers. The chief operations officer stood, voice even but firm. Effective Q1, Craig Lemrick will transition to technical consultant, he announced. No executive decision-making authority retained post-integration. There was no gasp, no murmuring, no rebuttal. Just the sound of Craig's jaw tightening. His shoulders didn't drop, but the bravado drained from his posture like air from a balloon. I didn't look at him. I didn't have to. He wasn't the voice in the room anymore. You can dress a stage, but you can't outrun the final act. That afternoon, while sipping tea in my office, I scrolled through the latest feature from Tech Maven. Who really sealed the Byte Frame deal? The quiet strategist behind a $57 million acquisition. No interviews, no direct quotes, just anonymous confirmation from multiple internal sources and a timeline that pointed unmistakably to me. The article's final paragraph read, "Sometimes the one you never heard from is the one who decided everything." I read that line twice, letting it wash over the years I'd been told I didn't fit the room. Then came the ripple effect. My phone lit up, a text from Leora. "So, you were always the real brain?" I didn't answer immediately. I let the next message come through, from my mother. I didn't know, but I see it now. I typed out 2 words and stopped. Then I deleted them and simply sent, "Thank you." There was nothing more to say, and nothing else I needed to hear. That evening, Heath and I sat curled on the couch, watching the snow blur the city skyline outside our window. "I'm thinking about taking time off after this wraps," I told him. He raised an eyebrow. "A real break?" "A purposeful one," I said. "I want to write something about quiet leadership, about women like me who build behind the curtain, not to shame, to document." He smiled. "You finally have their attention. What will you do with it?" I didn't answer right away. Later, alone, I wrote in my journal, "Leadership isn't loud. It's consistent, invisible, and undeniable when it lands." The next morning, after a late start and a second cup of coffee, I opened my laptop. Emails loaded slowly. A new subject line caught my eye. Tech Vision Conference. Keynote invitation for Maelis Dorn. I stared at it, unsure for a moment whether it was real. Then I laughed, not loud, but fully. A sound pulled from deep beneath the surface of years spent biting my tongue. "Let's see what happens," I said quietly, when the quiet one finally takes the stage. The Tech Vision Conference had its own kind of rhythm. Everything buzzed but never shouted. The prep room backstage smelled like hairspray and burnt coffee. I sat on a worn leather chair, slides open on my laptop, adjusting the order of my notes one last time. My keynote was titled, "Silent Strategy, Leading Without Applause." There was a peace in knowing I no longer had to raise my voice to be heard. I glanced at my phone as I closed the final slide. Heath had texted a photo Leora posted the night before, a throwback from her wedding. It was one of the group photos from the reception. My dress, my hands, even the corner of my shoulder were visible, but my face had been cropped out. She tagged everyone except me. Heath didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I saved the image, not out of pettiness, but to remember. Sometimes people erase you while smiling in your direction. That photo was proof. You can be edited out of history, even when you show up in full color. The stage manager peeked into the prep room. 5 minutes, she said. I stood, smoothed my jacket, and slid my thumb across the metal clasp of my clicker. The last time I had submitted these slides, a year ago, for our internal company summit, they never made it to air. I was told Craig had convinced the committee they were too technical for the audience, that they wouldn't land. Now they were front and center on the biggest stage of the year. Backstage, a volunteer holding a clipboard looked over my title slide and whispered, "Funny. Someone tried to present something really similar last year. It never made the program." I smiled, eyes on the curtain. "I know, I wrote both." The lights dimmed. I walked onto the stage. Applause, polite, respectful, but not expecting much. I began slowly. No drama, no pacing. I laid out my ideas like I'd built them, one solid layer at a time. 10 minutes in, the room was silent, but not bored, engaged, holding breath. When I reached the final slide, I paused, not for effect, but because I wanted to feel it. "You don't need permission to take up space," I said, voice even. "You just need the courage not to shrink." They didn't clap right away. They stood first. Then the applause came. Full, earnest. No one had been cued. They simply knew. I walked backstage with calm legs but a loud heart. Craig wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. Instead, a young woman, maybe 25, approached me with both hands wrapped around a conference tote. "I've never heard someone speak like that," she said. "It made me feel seen." I thanked her. Genuinely. Because I finally felt something Craig always claimed, influence. But this time, it was earned, not manufactured. Back in the hotel room that evening, I changed out of my heels and opened my messages. One from my mother. "Leora told me about the speech. I saw a clip. You looked powerful. We never made space for you, did we?" I stared at it for a while, phone balanced on my knee. Then I typed, "It's okay, I built my own stage." Snow was melting in soft rivulets along the porch railing as I stepped into my home office that Monday morning. The light outside was pale and quiet, the kind that lets you know winter is loosening its grip, but not quite ready to leave. I carried a fresh cup of coffee in one hand, the other nudging my laptop open. The first thing I saw was the subject line. From Craig Lemrick. Subject. "Thank you." I stared at it for a long moment, unsure if I wanted to open it at all. But my fingers clicked before my mind caught up. "Thank you for not destroying me when you could have. I still have a lot to learn. See you at HQ next month." 3 lines. No fluff. No justifications. No sorry. Not even a signature beyond his name. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, slower. Each reading peeled back something different. Disbelief, a hollow kind of satisfaction, and finally, release. Not forgiveness. This wasn't about grace. It was acknowledgement, an admission of defeat disguised as civility. I drafted a reply. I kept it short. "You're welcome. Good luck." Then I highlighted the entire thing and hit delete. Some messages weren't meant to be answered. Some wounds, if replied to, stay open longer than they should. I moved the email to a folder I'd quietly created months ago. Silence spoke louder. Not every fire needs a scream. Some victories taste better in silence. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. Vera. I considered letting it ring out, but curiosity won. "Hi," I said, neutral. "I watched the full speech," she said, skipping greetings. "You didn't just speak, Malis. You unshackled. I've never seen you like that." I let the moment sit. "I was never asking to be seen," I told her. "I just stopped agreeing to be unseen." She paused. I could hear her exhale. "I know I've got no right to ask you to come back into the family like nothing happened." "You're right," I cut in gently. But we can build something new, if you want that. I just won't go back to the old house." She didn't cry. Neither did I. It wasn't that kind of moment, but it was honest, and that was new. The next morning, I received an invitation to guest lecture at the graduate business program at UT Austin. I accepted without hesitation, not because I needed the resume boost, I didn't, but because I remembered what it felt like to be the girl in the back row, wondering if she belonged. There's always one like her in every room. Later that week, I walked past the Byte Frame wing on the 3rd floor of HQ. Craig was inside a glass meeting room, head bent over a notepad. He looked up. Our eyes met. He nodded. I didn't stop. My office was down the hall. The door bore a new plaque, one I'd approved last week. Milas Dorn, Director, Strategic Innovation. The light through the window hit it just right. I ran my fingers over the metal letters, savoring how solid they felt. Then, without hesitation, I stepped inside and closed the door. Not softly, firmly. There's power in the pause between closing one chapter and opening your own. This time, I didn't wait for someone to let me in. I built the door and I shut it behind me.